Are there good native English teachers? Are there good non-native English teachers? Are there bad native English teachers? Are there bad non-native English teachers? Guys, the answer to these questions is the same. Yes. So in this episode, I want to unpack the pros and cons of having a native English teacher versus having a non-native English teacher and help you make the best choice for your learning journey. Hey there, how's it going? Thiago here, and welcome to another episode of the podcast. In case you're new here, this podcast is intended to help intermediate and advanced learners of English communicate with more confidence, more accuracy, more clarity, and more awareness. If this sounds like something you want for yourself and your English, and you are listening to me for the first time, subscribe to the channel here on YouTube and follow the show if you are on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or anywhere else you have your podcast on. Okay, I want to start by talking about native English teachers. What are the pros of having a native English teacher? First of all, I would say accent and fluency, because native speakers naturally have authentic pronunciation and intonation. After all, English is their first language. So especially if you want to nail that one specific accent, maybe getting a native teacher that speaks that accent natively might be the best course of action for you. I think that when it comes to American English and British English, it is also possible nowadays for you to find non-native English teachers who have what we call native-like accent and pronunciation, meaning that these non-native teachers speak so similarly to how a native speaker would speak that they have what we call a native-like English. So when it comes to American and British English, I would argue that native, non-native, it doesn't make much of a difference there, provided that you have a non-native English teacher who has this native-like accent. But if you are looking to learn maybe a more obscure accent of English, like Australian, maybe the English that is spoken in New Zealand, in Scotland, in Ireland, maybe getting a native English teacher from one of these countries might be the best course of action for you, okay? But regardless, this is definitely an advantage that native English teachers have over non-native English teachers. The authentic pronunciation, intonation, and accent, okay? Another pro, I would say, is the cultural insight that you can gain if you have a native English teacher, because native speakers, they can offer you first-hand knowledge of English-speaking cultures, idioms, slang, and this, in turn, provides a richer language learning experience. So for a native English teacher, I think it's much easier for that teacher to give you maybe the context of an idiom, why a certain expression is used that way, what is the rationale or the reasoning behind that idiom. Depending on the teacher, he or she might even give you the history of that idiom, of that expression. I mean, when that expression became popular in the English language and why. So it's much easier for a native English teacher to provide you with that cultural background of expressions, of idioms, than a non-native English teacher can, okay? So this is definitely a pro, I would say. Another pro, I think that interacting with a native speaker of English can serve as a great confidence boost for yourself. And I speak from personal experience because when I was learning English years ago, sometimes I would get the chance to interact with native speakers of English, either at work or at the schools I was teaching at, because, some of the teachers that were my colleagues at the schools, they were native speakers. So the mere fact that I was interacting with these native speakers served as confidence boosters for me, because I would think, oh, look at that. I'm talking to this person now. I would think to myself, I'm talking to this person. I am interacting with this person fully in English, and that person doesn't speak my first language. So the only way we are able to have a conversation, get things done, work together is because I speak English. I speak that person's first language. So being able to interact with native speakers like that, whether they are your teacher or not, I think it serves as a great confidence booster, because that is a good indicator that your English is good enough to operate and to communicate with native speakers of English. Okay? Before we continue with the content, I just want to let you know that my private community is officially up and running. By becoming a member of my private community, you get to join a select group of English learners who are just like you on the same boat, there to share their journeys with English, interact with each other, and also with me. I am there in the community as well. You can ask questions about English learning, and by becoming a member of the community, you also unlock access to some really cool bonuses like exclusive masterclasses, mini courses, live Q&As, content that is not available here on my public channels. So for a small amount of money every month, if you become a member, you get to support my work and also be part of a nice community and unlock some cool extra resources for your English. If you want to learn more about the community and how you can join, the link is here in the description of the video, also as a pinned comment on YouTube. And if you are listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, the link is in the show notes. But I want to invite you to become part of my private community, learn more about it, and I hope to see you there. But of course, there are cons to having a native English teacher. So I listed here a couple. The first con, I would say, is the assumption people have about the proficiency level of those native speakers, because not all native speakers are good teachers. Why? Because they might lack formal training, or they might struggle to explain grammar rules clearly, especially to beginners and lower levels. All right? So I see that happening quite frequently. For example, in Brazil, there are a lot of foreigners here. And when an American comes to Brazil, or when an English person comes to Brazil, what is the first thing they do in order to make some money so they can pay their bills? Teach English. So I'm not saying that everybody is like that, but this is quite common. I mean, if a native speaker of English goes to a country that doesn't speak English as the second language, chances are that person will immediately look for work teaching English, because it is a skill that is in demand in that country. A country such as Brazil, for example, it's kind of a blue ocean, actually, this area of ESL here. So for an American coming here and teaching English is great, right? It's a blue ocean. But we have to remember that not all these Americans or not all these native speakers are good teachers. Maybe they've never had formal training as teachers. Simply because they speak the language natively, they get work. And I know that some schools, some language schools, hire people as teachers just because they are native speakers of the language, not necessarily because they have formal training as teachers. I'm not saying that this happens all the time, but this sure happens, okay? So this is one con, I would say, because you might have a native English teacher there at your language school, but you don't know for sure, how much of a teacher that person is. Yeah? Maybe that person is just trying to, pay their bills while, staying in that country, in Brazil, for example, for a little while. All right? I would also say that not all native speakers of English are good speakers of English. That's another con. All right? Just because a person is a native speaker of a language doesn't mean that person speaks that language well. That is true in my language, in my first language, that is true in your first language, and that is also true in the English language. So just because you have a native English teacher, that doesn't mean that that person is the best role model for you when it comes to speaking the language, being a good communicator. Maybe the person doesn't articulate their thoughts so well or so cohesively, or maybe the person uses lots of informal, slangy vocabulary. So the mere fact that a person is a native speaker of English doesn't necessarily mean that that person is going to be a good English teacher. And I can attest to that myself. I speak Portuguese as a first language. Portuguese is my native language. I'm not qualified as a teacher to teach that language. I will have to learn a little bit more about the language and a little bit more about how to teach this language. You see the difference? Another con to having a native English teacher, I would say, is cultural barriers. On one hand, the cultural insight you can get with a native speaker is great, but it can also be a barrier because I have experienced this in my lifetime as a teacher, guys. I have seen some teachers, some native English teachers who unintentionally use culturally specific references in their classes or humor that learners simply don't understand. Okay? So I think it's important for that native English teacher to be aware of that and to try to bridge that gap between his or her culture and the culture of the students he or she is teaching. So that, if you're going to use something that is more culturally specific in a lesson, you are able to explain that in a clear way. And if you are able to even pick something from your student's culture and compare that with your own culture, that's even better. Okay? So I think that very good native English teachers do this, okay? But more inexperienced ones or speakers who are not necessarily teachers, they're just doing it as a gig, teaching English as a gig, they might, not do this so well, So they tend to use culturally specific references, humor in a way that students just look at them like, what are you talking about, man? And that can happen unintentionally. So, it's important to be aware of that. Okay, now that we have talked a little bit about native English teachers, let's talk about non-native English teachers. First of all, what are the pros of having a non-native English teacher? By definition, a non-native English teacher is a person who learned English as a second language and who doesn't speak English as their first language. I think that the first pro is the relatable experience. Why? Because non-native English teachers have been through the language learning journey themselves and understand the challenges that you, the learner, face. It's much easier for a non-native English teacher to understand your mistakes, where you're coming from, because that teacher has made the same mistakes or has experienced the same frustrations, the same journey as you are on right now, okay? That's why I think it's extremely important for a native English teacher to learn other languages. If a native English teacher of English has never learned a second or third language themselves, I believe that that teacher is not going to be able to relate or connect with their learners as well as he or she could. Okay, so it's really important for the person who is tutoring you, who is mentoring you or coaching you. It's very important for that person to have gone through the same process you are on right now. This is extremely important. And when it comes to English teachers, non-native English teachers have that because they also had to learn the language themselves. Okay. Personally, I'm also very much interested in results, like, the results that the person has achieved. So you should ask yourself this too, guys. Whenever you are starting a new endeavor in your life and you are looking for a teacher, a coach, a mentor to help you achieve those results you want, ask yourself, okay, has this person achieved the results I want to achieve in this field? If the answer is no, I would rethink having that person as my teacher, my coach, because I'm looking for someone. If I'm going to be mentored by someone or taught by someone, I'm looking for someone who has been there and done that, someone who has done the thing that I'm trying to do and who has done it successfully. Okay? So that's the first point here. Another pro, I would say, of having a non-native English teacher is the grammar focus. Non-native English teachers, I know it's kind of ironic to say this, but they tend to have stronger grammar knowledge. And they can explain the rules of grammar, of the structures more easily and more clearly. And I think it makes perfect sense because in my case, for example, it's funny to say this, guys, but I know much more about English grammar than I know Portuguese grammar, my first language. If I were to teach Portuguese grammar, I would struggle. I wouldn't even know how to begin. But to become an English teacher, I had to formally study the language and study the grammar and understand the structures. And then when I started teaching, I had to think of different ways I could teach those structures to my students in a way that was clear. So if you are a native speaker of English, maybe you haven't gone through that process of deliberately, formally studying the grammar of your own language and coming up with ways to teach that, you know? And I think this is very common for anybody who has learned a language natively, you know? Usually your first language, you speak it because that's all you've heard all your life. That's all you've spoken all your life. And yes, you might have studied it at school formally, but you know, usually at school, we don't pay attention so much. We are kids, we are teenagers. It's not like we are studying seriously to understand more about the language, you know? So I can totally attest to that. I feel much better prepared to teach English grammar than to teach my own language's grammar, you know? So this is another point. One more pro, I would say, is empathy and patience. I believe that non-native English teachers can be more patient and more empathetic in understanding of your mistakes, you know, because they're also learners themselves and they make mistakes themselves. So they tend to be, let's say, more forgiving, okay? Of course, it depends on the native English teacher you have. Maybe you have a very good native English teacher who is very understanding, very empathetic. But if you look at it as a whole, the probability that a non-native English teacher will be more empathetic to your mistakes and your struggles, I believe they are higher. It is a higher probability because, you know, again, that person has gone through the same process you are going through right now. But of course, there are cons to having non-native English teachers. So one con, I would say, of a non-native English teacher is the accent variation. Since the person is not a native English speaker, they might have a slight accent when they speak. I have met some non-native English teachers who had actually very thick accents in English. In my opinion, that's not ideal. But, you know, that could be another topic of discussion. So if you are a learner looking to perfect your pronunciation, your clarity, your accent even, maybe you want to have more of a native-like accent, I would recommend choosing well the non-native English teacher you're going to go for, okay? You might need to, you know, be more selective because that is a con, yeah? Non-native English teachers will have accent variations, okay? Another con, I would say, is less exposure to idioms and slang. Non-native English teachers might have less familiarity with everyday expressions or cultural nuances. That's just obvious, okay? In that sense, I think that the native speaker has the upper hand, you know? And also the learner perception. I think that when it comes to the learner perception, this is a con for the learner and also a con for the non-native English teacher. Because some learners might perceive non-native teachers as less qualified, despite their teaching skills, okay? So be careful with that and reflect on this. Do I have this bias towards non-native English teachers? Do I tend to favor native English teachers just because they are native speakers? You know, so be careful with that bias if you have it, because by having that, first of all, it's not good for the non-native teachers because, you know, they could be having more students but they are not having more students because, students have this bias. They just want to have classes with the native speaker. But I will say it's also a con for you, for the learner. If you think this way, if you believe that it's better to have classes only with native speakers, than with non-native teachers, you might be missing on the opportunity of having classes with an amazing non-native English teacher. It could be an experience that can change your life. Okay? So that's another con, I would say, when it comes to non-native English teachers. All right? So now that we have covered both the pros and cons of native and non-native English teachers, I want to leave you with the final reflection. And the final reflection here, guys, the final takeaway is go beyond that. Go beyond that. This, in my opinion, this is just a detail, okay? Whether your English teacher is a native speaker of English or not, this is a detail, okay? You should go beyond that. So I want to leave you here with some questions for you to ask yourself when looking for an English teacher for yourself. So question 1, think to yourself when analyzing the teachers. Is this person a successful language learner? That's the first question. For non-native English teachers, that's an obvious yes, right? Because, if you see that this teacher speaks English well, yes, that person has learned another language, a second language successfully. But if you are looking for a native English teacher, check that information. Does that native teacher speak other languages? Okay? I think that's an important question for you to reflect on. So again, is this person a successful language learner, or this person only speaks English, their first language? This is number 1. Number 2, is this person passionate about teaching? It's important that you have a teacher who is passionate about the language, about English in this case, about teaching, a person who is patient, okay? So is this person passionate about teaching, or the person just does it because, I don't know, they got to make a living. They got to pay the bills, I understand that, we work to pay the bills, of course, right? But this translates to how you operate, to how you work, and we can feel it, guys. We can feel when a person enjoys teaching or not. Yeah, I think you as a student, you can feel it. You can feel when the teacher is really into it or not, right? So ask yourself this question. Is this person passionate about teaching? Next question. Do I feel comfortable with this person? It's important that you feel comfortable with your teacher. It doesn't matter who it is, if it is a native or non-native. Do you feel comfortable with this person? You're going to be with this person for at least a few months, if not years, right? Do you feel comfortable talking to this person, interacting with this person, having this person as your coach, as your mentor, as your teacher? Okay? Another question. Does this person understand my needs? Another question to ponder. Is this person able to explain things clearly? That's another point, because maybe you do something very well, but you suck at teaching it, So doing something extremely well doesn't mean that you teach that extremely well. Teaching in and of itself is an art form. I think it's a skill. Yes, it's a skill. It's an ability that you acquire with experience and studying, but it's also an art form. It's a talent, okay? So some people are naturally better at explaining things and making things more palatable, clear, okay? So ask yourself, is this teacher able to explain things clearly? Do I understand this teacher when they are explaining something to me? Is it easy for me to grasp what you're saying or what you're explaining? Okay? Is this person positive and encouraging? Your teacher should be positive, should be encouraging. All right? Yes, your teacher should give you constructive feedback and point out your mistakes, but also this person should be positive and encouraging. All right? It goes back also to making you feel comfortable. Do you feel comfortable with this teacher? All right? Finally, guys, this is a huge question. I think that maybe this is the most important question, at least to me. Check it out. Does this person sound like I want to sound in English? Let me read that again. Does this person sound like I want to sound? In other words, does this person speak English in a way that makes me want to speak English like that? Okay? Do I see myself speaking that way? Do I see myself sounding that way? In other words, is that person's English inspiring to me, to want to learn with that person? All right? So this is a huge question because you might have two very good teachers in front of you for you to choose. Okay? Native or non-native, it doesn't matter. But you might have two very good teachers. They speak English well, they have experience, they are qualified, they are great teachers. But you might like the way that one sounds better than the other. Maybe the way one of them speaks, articulates, pronounces the words sounds better to your ears. You like that. So it makes sense that you want to have classes with that teacher. Okay? So think about this. Does this teacher have the kind of English that I would like to have? If you watch a teacher on YouTube, if you go to a school looking for a course and you meet some teachers and you hear them talking, guys, if you have this reaction of, man, I want to speak English like that guy or like that girl. I want to speak English like them. If you have that, that is a good indicator that that teacher is the right teacher for you to follow, for you to consume the content, for you to have classes with, buy the courses from that teacher, all that kind of stuff. So think about this. All right? Do I want to sound like that person? Okay? And there you have it, guys. The pros and cons of native English teachers versus non-native English teachers. At the end of the day, in my experience, I have met wonderful native English teachers who were very good teachers. I have met wonderful non-native English teachers who are also amazing. And I have also met native English teachers who are not that good and non-native English teachers who are not that good. So again, it goes beyond just being native or non-native. And that was the main point I wanted to bring home in this episode. All right? Guys, thank you so much for listening. Subscribe to the channel here on YouTube. And also, if you are on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, follow the show there. Leave me a 5-star review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. That helps me a lot there. And check out my new community. This is my private community. And for a small amount every month that you pay, you gain access to some really cool benefits, some exclusive content that is not available on my public channels. So check it out. The link is here in the description of the video as a pinned comment below, and also in the show notes if you are on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. I'm Thiago. I'm signing off. Thank you so much, and I'll talk to you very soon in the upcoming video. Bye-bye.